Hello, everyone, and welcome to probably the final episode of Gaming the System, at least for this year. Who knows? Who can say? Goodness. I'm joined with my old friend Seth. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. How you doing?
There you go, see. And yeah, we're just going to kind of freestyle for maybe an hour, give or take. It won't be as long as the Larry episode, which people need to know that before editing, the one with Guru Larry was like 4 hours long.
Oh,
And then we
wow.
and then we kept chatting for like 3-4 hours after the call. So
Sounds like fun.
yeah, I like Larry a lot. He's a good guy.
He reminds me of a friend that when we play Dota, there's basically two Brits I play Dota with, and one of them, when I heard Larry, he reminded me of a friend that when we play Dota, like the way how he uses words, the tone, the color of the voice, it all reminded me. So that was definitely a positive experience to hearing him.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I've known. Well, I mean, I've known of him for about but the better part of 15 years, and we've been kind of friendly for the last 10. So
Hmm, that's nice. I mean, I think he was, or maybe still is, subscribed to my channel that I haven't uploaded a lot, and he commented on the Oni review back when it was made for a competition way back when. He made some original art for the game when it was being developed or something.
yeah, he did. Which he's a very. He's getting on a bit now, but he's a legend in the industry. And as far as like the content creation goes, he's done a ton of things. Like he was on TV. His own channels, like his own original series, are really good, and then his contributions with his art. Like he's a very accomplished guy. So
That is, I watched some of his videos like 5 or 10 years ago. It's good. I guess it just wasn't my cup of tea, or I didn't bite into it as much as I did for some other stuff. But you can definitely see that the guy has competence, that the guy has charm, that the guy has experience. The various shows he's been on, the art that he's made, his own show, and his own content on YouTube, and how he's trying to explore something new. I remember when you were talking in the podcast about that as well.
yeah, and that's been a kind of a big facet. I think every episode I've done, we've had a conversation about RPGs and why I don't like turn-based games.
Oh, now you sound like my brother. The game could be like really good in terms of, I don't know, gameplay or story, but if it's turn-based, that's a hard turn off for him, which I understand. I mean, they're not my favorite genre, but I can stomach them.
Turn-based games are just boring. And the thing is with JRPGs, I'm sure that some of the best JRPGs ever made are probably incredible games. I'm not
hmm
I'm not sitting through 150 hours of slop to find out the last 10 hours being really good.
I, I mean, I guess that depends on the game, because if now I'm gonna sound like I'm some sort of devil's advocate for everything else or a contrarian, but if that were the case, then JRPGs like, I don't know, Final Fantasy VII wouldn't be the breakthrough, and won't get the praise that it got. It depends on if the story is long and if it's made well for that length. But as you stated, if it's 120 hours of that and it's basically 80 hours of slop, then yeah, I can understand that. Even shorter games can suffer from slop just being thrown in to pad out the length.
I think that's a big part of it, though. Is like, how do you keep 150 hours of gaming engaging when most companies can't even do 10 to 15?
I well, usually I would say that something, if you're making something like, and you're an artist and you realize that this length won't work, let's shorten it or cut something out, because during production that happens with games, even when they're developing it well and they have a plan and they know what to do. uh, Quite a lot of games have like cut content, but I guess it depends on what the higher ups are telling you to do, usually publishers and stockholders and shareholders and all that. And when they say, well, this is popular, so increase the length, add this and that, when that doesn't add much. For example, two games that come to my mind is Mafia 2 and Mafia 3. So the critique at Mafia 2 was basically you just have story missions, You don't have side activities like, I don't know, bowling or hunting or anything else like in GTA 4 or Red Dead Redemption 2. It's just you have these story missions, and the story is very well told with the characters and how they end and all that. When they got that critique, the next developers for Mafia 3 took it. And so basically it turns into Assassin's Creed in the sense of before you do the main mission that pushes the story forward, you need to do 3 or 4 missions of assassinate this guy, blow this up. And that's, I think, I haven't played Mafia 3, so, take this with reserve. And when that happens, that boils it down, and the developers did that because the higher up said, well, they criticized that the game is short and it doesn't have a lot of content. So they were like, slap that in and toss it out, I guess. I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is a good example of how you can make a really long game and make all of it or most of it work to be entertaining, be it the main story or something on the side.
Yeah, and we've spoken about open world games and the kind of advent of content and choice paralysis before. I mean, it all kind of comes down to a lot of open world games, maybe barring a couple of exceptions, they're not really made with longevity. They're not really made with the idea of here is this world, here are these kind of parameters. You can go and do anything, because in a game where you're told you can do anything, you don't really want, you can do everything. You don't really want to do anything. And it's kind of like the culmination of like Cyberpunk 2077 is a good shooter, it's a good role playing game in the strictest definition. However, where it's a game where you can just kind of drive around night cities or hang out in bars, you're not really doing a lot. It's like GTA. Once you get bored of shooting civilians or running over old women or whatever, you want to be doing a mission. You want to be an active participant in the story. You want to be engaging in the content that's there. I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 is maybe the only exception I can think of where it's like, okay, you can go hunting, you can go fishing, you can go on a treasure hunt, you can exhaust Strangers and Freaks missions and side missions and other things and just kind of explore. And the game, maybe Ghost of Tsushima as well, it opens up enough to be like, okay, well, you can do things in the open world, but so many games. I mean, Ubisoft, the prime, the prime example of this. So many games will have 1,000 icons on a map, 1,000 things you can do, but you won't want to do any of it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the only Ubisoft game that I played from memory was Assassin's Creed 3, and I enjoyed it. Side content and the story. I think it was well made. That maybe there was a bit more critique on the main character and how supposedly dull he is. But then I'm thinking of, well, yeah, he's angry. That's like, the stereotypical young man of the day, and he's Native American. But you need to consider the circumstances of why he's angry, why he's doing this, and it shows that with a bit more complexity that just, I don't know, fighting for freedom doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the right path, that there's still a lot of things that can go wrong, irrespective of the choices that you make. But that's more about the story and less about, the structure of the game. That was an okay game, but yeah, I noticed that they basically just toss a lot of stuff, collectibles and all that. And there's a lot of it, you don't feel fulfilled when you complete a side mission or collect the stuff or anything else. I remember when I was at my cousin's place, we played a bit Far Cry 6 on his PlayStation. And, competently made game in terms of shooting and everything, but nothing to really grab your attention, nothing to really say like, okay, this time I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. It doesn't sound fulfilling. Whereas in, for example, Red Dead Redemption 2, which is technologically set at the end of the 19th century, meaning you don't have a lot of options in terms of gameplay. It's revolvers, some pistols. You don't get machine guns unless they're stationary. Not a lot. But it was fun. It was rewarding in the sense that every time I need to shoot, I need to click twice the fire button because I'm using a revolver. I need to cock the gun back or something else. It really added to it. And also what you mentioned with the Strangers and Freaks and side missions and hunting and fishing. I don't like doing those stuff like, hunting or fishing. But occasionally I would do because it's well made, it's fun. And I guess they set out to really build that world to make feel authentic, immersive, and it's like something that you simultaneously saw in movies, so you know what it is, but also a unique world of itself, like the mountains, the forest, the clothes, the different weapons there, like even if they're differently named, to the point that I think a university professor was holding lectures on how Red Dead Redemption 2 depicts the Wild West at the end pretty well, even with some inaccuracies, and a book was written about that. I think it depends on what you send. It's like, okay, I want this. This is the stage. These are the actors. This is what it's there. If you're like Ubisoft and you're producing these sandboxes because it sells, because sandboxes, I guess, marketable, it gives the customer a sense of, choice of a good package, then yeah, obviously it won't fill a story or a game that well that will last 100 hours, because then you're just tossing in slop. You're just pushing forward forces to the meat grinder to buy time, but not actually to develop a strategy or a counter or anything else. That's how I see it. Sorry if I didn't provide an answer. It's just that I have these stream of thoughts and I try to structure them to provide an answer.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think really a lot of it kind of comes down to modern games. I can't engage with a lot of modern games as I could when I was a kid or a teenager, or even like 5, 10 years ago, to a point where I'm like, okay, we hit the kind of graphic ceiling. We've kind of plateaued in terms of progression in a traditional sense. Like VR is getting like VR is getting there, but it's not very intuitive yet.
Mhm.
We can have all the kind of graphics capabilities on like the 4090 or PS5 Pro, Xbox Series X, like whatever. We can do these incredible things and build these amazing worlds, but in terms of like how is it furthering like games getting better? How is it furthering like game development and the fact that like okay, I'm of the belief that graphics haven't really gotten much better since 2014, 2015. If you look at a lot of games that came out around that time, like Arkham Knight, Witcher 3, you know, there's not a lot of difference between that and like the stuff bleeding edge coming out today, and we're nearly 10 years and two console generations after. And you think like games now, if you think about like GTA for instance, or Red Dead
Mhm.
Redemption, right? We are quite literally like 12, 13 years separating GTA 5, GTA 6, Red Dead Redemption to Red Dead Redemption 2 was like, what was it, 8 years?
Red Dead Redemption 2 was in 2018, 2019 for PC, so that's
Yeah.
6 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're seeing like larger and larger gaps with games coming out and then the kind of quality of the kind of games that are being released. Like I can't engage with it because I honestly don't feel like video games are made for me anymore, because we're at a facet now where video games are such a big medium. They're such big business and big money that in a kind of appeal of trying to appeal to everyone, it simultaneously appeals to no one. It's this blanket slate cookie cutter approach. I mean, a few weeks ago, I think it was like a couple months ago even, Ian Weaver came on the show and he said, open world games are kind of like oatmeal, like what flavor, do you want? This like meaningless slop that you can just eat and get out. And
Mhm.
I think that's a really kind of good way of putting it, to where nothing's really tailored for the end user now. Nothing really, very few I know some do, but very few games will have an impact. Very few games will be meaningful because it's more
Yeah,
about the
because
money.
exactly that. Like, that's one of the factors. And well, if you allow me to go on a longer tangent, you reminded
Yeah.
me of I remember when I was younger. That sounds silly because I'm 31, so it's young, but it's not that old. It's not that young. But back in like the early 2000s, so graphics were getting better, but also some other stuff were getting better. And I like to call, well, I don't know, the 90s and the 2000s the Wild West of video games. I mean, because I was born then, and that's when I played games. The oldest that I played back was, I don't know, like Duck Hunt and Super Mario on the Nintendo uh, uh, NES. So I didn't go further back in history. That was like the furthest I did. But games that I played back then, you notice that some things weren't refined. For example, third-person shooters. The camera was behind the protagonist, above him, and you were looking directly above him forward. It wasn't like to the shoulder, to the side, like in Gears of War or Resident Evil 4, where they figured, oh yeah, it's better if we lower the camera and put it to the side. So people were improvising and trying to find solutions. And also, it feels like back in those days, they were willing to experiment a bit more, even if the game doesn't sell well or isn't exactly a practical and easy to go. I talked with my brother when we were talking about this subject. You ever heard of the franchise, like, what was it called? Red Faction. Red Faction.
Yeah, we spoke about Red Faction a few months ago on this
Yeah,
show.
probably missed it. My memory is getting sometimes forgetful in those regards. And I remember the first game, finished it, but the first game was really impressive for me because if you had explosive or other types of ordnance, you could blow your way around most of the map or most of the level, to the point that, well, if you made a hole and you dropped in it, you soft locked yourself or hard locked yourself because you can't climb back up where you need to go. But there was that possibility. And then for the sequel, they severely limited the destruction of what you can blow up. It's like, yeah, you can blow these walls, but only specific walls. You can blow, the dirt, so you can go under and create your path. And the graphics were getting better, controls were getting better, it was getting more streamlined, it was getting, I guess, more intuitive to play the game, but not exactly interesting, not something that, boggles the mind or something that makes you think of how to provide a solution to something that entertains you. And I agree with the graphics point. Like 2016, 2018, we're talking about games like I played Battlefield 1, I played Red Dead Redemption 2, and those games look really good even today, not just because they polish the graphics, but both of those games have a specific art direction that when you look at them, you recognize as, that's Battlefield 1, or that's Red Dead Redemption 2, despite it being really realistic and set in World War One at the end of the 19th century, respectively. And I don't understand why, why are games getting bigger? Why are games putting so much focus on the graphics when, the hair moves on the character? I don't care about that. You think I'll notice that? If you know about Rome Total War 2, they were making some points about how, if you zoom in on the soldiers, they'll show faces of shock and horror and all that, which is sort of missing the point because it's a strategy game where you need to coordinate soldiers to do, flanking, ambushes, and all that. So you probably won't be zooming into their faces. So they invested, money, resources, time into a feature of a game that won't be noticed when something else can emphasize the horror and shock of war in those ancient times, like the music, the sounds of clashing blades, and etc. Like original Rome Total War and Medieval 2 Total War did much better combat and sound and feeling like you were really in the antique or really in the medieval ages leading a faction than, the modern games, because it's a different focus. And also, I guess I'm a bit older because for some games that I was looking forward, like Company of Heroes 3, when it came out, I forgot about it. Like I noticed how it looks, how it plays, it looks decent, but I guess I'm sticking to older games that I think are better polished. Not sure if that's just nostalgia or some of my observations, but basically what I was trying to say, that I agree with you on that, and that the sense of innovation and trying to be a bit more daring in terms of, story or gameplay is lost. So, unless someone in the big publishers manages to kick something as a surprise, or usually from the indie scene, we ain't seeing much in that regard.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel as though maybe it's nostalgia, maybe I'm just biased to a time where I had, more time than I have money. But like now, like I have, I guess, a small level of influence in the games industry, I suppose. Um, I'm quite privileged in the fact that I don't pay for a lot of games anymore. I get given a lot of things for free. Um, but that kind of trivialized it because like 10 years ago, when I think back to like when I was like a gaming YouTuber, I had
Hmm.
very little money, but I had a lot of time, and most people can relate to that. Like you're growing up, you don't have money to buy like new games very often. So for me, when it was like when I bought a brand new game, maybe like
Hmm.
a few times a year, you know, until I had a job at like 16, where I was buying like maybe a game a month then. But when it was like okay, like it's my birthday, it's Christmas, it's a friend bought me something, whatever. You wanted the game that you got,
Yeah.
to be like it had to be good. It had to be, you were gonna sit there, you were gonna play it relentlessly, and that was gonna be your life for a few days or weeks or months even. And for me, that was like the first Red Dead Redemption, Max Payne 3, Ninja Gaiden 2, Ninja Gaiden 3, um,
Hmm.
the old Call of Juarez games, the Darkness 2, LA
Oh,
Noir.
those are, yeah, those are really high quality and special games that can last you a long time, even if you just replay them. Yeah.
I mean, not all of them were good, but they were kind of good time sinks. And now I think I have something like 700-800 games on Steam. I have a Steam Deck. I have a Epic Games account with tons and tons of stuff to play. I have more games than I know what to do with, and it's the choice paralysis thing. Have you ever been on like Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus, whatever? If you're on a streaming platform and you're presented with thousands of movies and hundreds of TV shows, and you just think, well, okay, they have so much that I don't want to pick anything. I don't want to choose anything unless you're in the mood for something, unless you know what you want going in.
Yeah.
And I think I've had this conversation literally every fucking show we've done, but it's the kind of culmination of because we don't own anything anymore, because it's either like streaming or like Game Pass or digital, and therefore can be erased at any point in time. It's kind of like it's hard to get excited because it could just disappear one day. It's not mine forever. When I think about my PS2 games I have in a box, I have something like 200 PS2 games, a box or two of Xbox games. Uh,
Hmm.
and I can own that. Like I can go to my PS2, I can go in the box and I can put in the disc and I can sit there and I can play the game and that's it. And I have a PS5. I have two PS5s even. I have the PS5 downstairs, which is now my girlfriend's one, and then
Hmm.
I have the PS1 edition, the special edition PS5, in the colorway of the PS1, and
Hmm.
it's digital only, and it's pretty, and I bought it because it looks nice, but none of my games will work in that. It's only the stuff I have downloaded,
Yeah. Hmm.
of which I don't
Could be.
of which I don't own anything digital because it's only ever PlayStation Plus or a couple of press keys, and that's kind of it.
Could be. Could be. Continue. Continue. This is interesting to listen. I need to pay a bit more attention. Continue.
And so it's moreover the fact that we went from like PCs. My first gaming PC
Hmm.
had a disc drive. It had a Blu-ray drive and a DVD drive. Had both that could
Hmm.
read write. And it meant I was buying physical PC games until like 2015, 2016. And now, I mean, I haven't had a disc drive on my PC for like 10 years. I don't think a lot of people have. But,
Yeah.
because it's all like Steam, it's all like Epic Games, GOG, Ubisoft, whatever. We've gotten so kind of used to the fact that we don't own anything. And I think that's kind of fucked up in a way. We've just kind of gotten to the point of like, well, we don't own these games anyway. They're just licenses. They'll disappear one day. They're on an account that, there's no tangibility to it. And I feel like that kind of takes away a lot of the appeal because, when I was when I was young, even 5, 10 years ago in the gaming industry, if I wanted a game and I had the physical disc, I owned that game. But ever since like the PS4, PS5 generations have come in, even if you buy a game on disc, if you buy, uh, like,
You buy the digital storage of the game, not I think
yeah,
Larry mentioned in the previous
yeah,
episode, like like when you buy a physical game, it's not necessarily that you'll have the disc in it. It's just okay. Here's the code. Punch it in. Now it's on your PlayStation 5.
well, that's how it's treated. Like, even if you did want to just, okay, I only buy physical PS5 games, I want to be able to put the disc in and play it. One
Hmm.
day, because these games they connect to servers, you have to install the game from digital anyway, and that's the version you play. The disc is just like an access card. It's a key card, that authenticates the code and says, okay, we verified this serial number. You can now play. Physical media is kind of fucking useless now anyway, because say theoretically, if
Hmm.
the servers go offline, well, they will eventually, 10 years time, maybe 15 years time, and you want to
Hmm.
play a PS5 game, you know, you get like Sonic Frontiers off the shelf or whatever, and you put it into the
Hmm.
PS5, and you go, oh, I'm gonna play this, and then it installs onto the console, and you're stuck with whatever's baked onto that disc, and that's the end of it.
No updates, no expansions, because those were probably released digitally online.
I mean, we spoke about this in a couple episodes before, but it's like the crew. Ubisoft they took away the crew,
Yeah.
and there was, oh well, servers are offline, games useless now, and that and it wasn't just you can no longer play this. It was they took it from everyone's game libraries. If you owned the crew on UPlay or Steam or whatever, that was now useless. You could have a disc of the crew on PS4, whatever. You put it in, useless. And the same with like to a lesser extent something like Concord. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh,
on the
yeah. Yeah, it shut down after what, 13 days, and
yeah.
like,
So
oh, yeah.
I got a press code for Concord, and I never played it because why would I? But
Yeah.
literally, yeah, 12, 13 days later, it was all offline. I think they got refunded people who bought it, but the point being, people have become so numb and so used to the fact that like I don't own anything. This is great. Like, and I'm looking at my long Steam library. Like I've got Sonic Frontiers, a game I bought twice by the way, because I lost my fucking PS5 copy and I can't play it digitally now. But I have it on Steam as well. I have all these games at like a moment's notice, and I just can't get excited about them because I don't own these things. Like it doesn't matter, not really.
Well, honestly, I think the enjoyment of a game is less related to whether you own it. Well, okay, it matters if you own it or not. Obviously, nobody's comfortable with possessing something but not owning it. I'm not going to argue against that point. But it's more as you mentioned before, we mentioned before, like the way how the games are made today, it's more for profit. It's seen as an entertainment product, but the emphasis is put on the product instead of the entertainment. So you know where that is going. I think it's more like when I look at which games I play, the games that I play are Dota 2 because of the company of friends that I have. That's entertaining. Recently, Dark Souls 2 with a friend cooperatively been, and a bit for the challenge, different builds and all that. Company of Heroes 2, again, an old RTS because I'm sticking to what I played before, what's comfy, and a bit of Red Dead Redemption 2 because I enjoy the world and all that. Those are all games that, you'll notice some are good, some are less good, but they're entertaining. They're from a time where I perceive them as enjoyable and they're still enjoyable. And the new games that are coming today, there are probably some good games out there that are coming out, but like back in the day when I was reading in magazines about upcoming games, it seemed like they were coming less in quantity, so you could absorb it better. So you could know, like, oh, this game is coming out. I'm gonna look out for that. even though I can't run it on my PC right now. And today there's a bunch of games and even some big ones that grab, the attention from big franchises. It's like, oh yeah, another installment. Whoop-de-doo. Like Call of Duty. Oh, okay, great. It's here every year. And if anything interesting? Not much? Okay, good. Like, it's basically like if you eat pizza for a week every day. Even if the pizza is the greatest thing that you've tasted, and it varies, you get sick of it. You want something else, or at least eat pizza every third or fourth or fifth day. That's the issue. I think about ownership, Crew pointed out how not radical, how extreme it can go. Technically, Steam also functions on that principle, even way back when it was established. The only difference today is basically that they changed the wording in the document, in the disclaimer, that makes it clear that you do not own the game, you own the license to it. It was always like that, but now it's clear. And I think that it's exactly the opposite, like that people are voicing against this and all that, but what can they do? I don't think that people are happy for it. It's more like they're apathetic, if that's the right word.
It's kind of sad that that's like the best we could do is just apathy to the situation. It's like, well, I guess we have to just get on with it because that's the way it is, rather than questioning why it's the way that it is.
Well, I think people. I'll tell you from my perspective. From here, from Croatia, from the Balkans, it's a lot of people are apathetic, not just for games, but also for life in general, politics and such. The thing about that is when you start asking questions like why is it like this, why it is like that, you realize that there are some solutions that can be implemented, but those solutions won't come from you or someone higher up. It's going to come from the top. And those at the top in a company, like shareholders, directors, etc., don't see it that way. Like, you can explain why adding RPG mechanics in a game that didn't have them could make the product worse, not better. But the guy who's the publisher or the shareholder doesn't care. He points at something else and says, well, this is good, therefore it should be applied here. It's like, for example, if you're developing a car, obviously having an AC device in it so that it can cool off or make it warmer is universally good. Having extra protection is good. Having extra control, less expenditure of the fuel is good. Sorry for the weird wording. I'm trying to present this clearly. That's good. Like you won't point at the car and say less speed, please. But since we're talking about games, something that is inherently at least a bit artistic, it's like, yeah, I would prefer a slower paced game. Yeah, I would prefer a strategy game, not an action game. Yeah, I would prefer, and these guys are making the decisions. They're the ones giving money. And no matter how hard you try to explain to them, it won't guarantee that they will be like, yeah, okay, I understand why this won't be. They'll just double down on their decisions, and then the game will be made in that way that's not entertaining. And when you realize that the problem isn't the people who are making the games or some middle managers, but the top, and the top won't change, it won't crumble, there won't be a revolution, you just get a bit sad about it. So, ironically, when you ask questions about that, you get frustrated. That's why people turn to apathy, because hey, if I don't care, if I just accept it and trudge on, it will be slightly better for me. Not better like things will get better, but more like I'll grow a bit numb, I'll grow a bit dull, but I won't get frustrated. So I won't think, because if I think, it just frustrates me and hurts. Ergo, it's not useful. It's like, a smart guy in a village full of idiots, and you can't move out, and you can't change there anything. So naturally, the smart guy in the village full of idiots starts to get depression and all that, and people wonder why he's the eccentric, the weirdo, and all that, because he can see what the rest cannot, and the rest cannot because, it's not that they're necessarily idiots, they just accept, like, yeah, life is like that, because it's hard to imagine a change. It's hard to imagine that you fight something against for a long, long, long time, and that will yield a better result.
I think that's the worst part is though, like, realistically, you can't really change much of anything.
I always,
Not really.
I always get. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I played Red Dead Redemption 2, and I watched some videos on Red Dead Redemption 1 and some others. And I always got reminded of Dutch's last speech in Red Dead Redemption 1 when he's.
Can't fight fate, Arthur.
Oh,
It's like gravity.
yeah, but the way how, but I like how they used that quote, basically whole speech, implemented it in the prequel, and how it's the same words, but they have a different meaning. Like in Red Dead Redemption 2, Dutch was at least, had a bit more of a spirit, even though it was all slipping away. You could still see the fire somehow in him.
Yeah.
And in Red Dead Redemption 1, it's more of an admission to himself that this is the end of the road, and the only thing I have a choice here is how the road ends, and I can't change where the road will go. Like, he knew that he's either arrested and he's going to jail and possibly executed, or I fight, get shot, dead, or I toss myself off the cliff, which also leads to death, which is depressing, and I don't want to into that because, for example, when I look at other countries more to the west, I see that they had their times of strife and turbulence, but that things got better because, they had their history, culture, and resources to pull through. And when I compare it to my country in that regard, it's like, well, why can't we do the same? And then because history is different here for us. Culture, we think differently, and I guess for people who enjoy games, maybe they have a similar apathy to that. It's like, yeah, it wasn't about us. We can't dictate. When they say like vote with your wallet, that's not even a guarantee. I don't think it is. For example, they make a sandbox game. You don't like it. A lot of people don't buy the game. Game flops. Do you think that those on the top will get the lesson of maybe we should change genres or improve something else?
It's a very valid point. So we were before we started rolling, you were telling me about Horizon Zero Dawn. Now,
Oh, yeah, right.
it's been a running joke on this broadcast that we always tend to dunk on the game that feels so designed by committee and bland and flavorless, but you have an alternative perspective, at least your brother does, and through him you have a kind of approach.
I also, well, I never played, the newer God of War games, but I guess when it was a committee or they're taking themselves too seriously that the gameplay is less fun, I just got reminded of games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Spec Ops The Line, which is one of those games that you don't play for fun. The gameplay isn't that groundbreaking or fun or anything, but more story and what they're trying to do with the medium. So I wanted to ask my brother about, the story, the character, and what it happens, because I remember watching, the YouTuber Closer Look, if you ever heard of him.
Yes.
Okay, so he made like a video of what Cyberpunk 2077 did really well and what we didn't notice, something along that title. And in that video, he mentions Horizon Zero Dawn in terms of how it builds the mystery, how it reveals it, and how well it's executed. And I talked with my brother about that, and he mentioned, like, yeah, it's pieced together all nicely, and the character may not be the best in terms of like layers, like, I don't know, Arthur Morgan, Nico Bellic, or something like that, but she has enough of a character that you can point and understand her. One point that he said, for example, about Aloy is that she's stubborn and, as he stated, narrow-minded, and he gave a point, I don't know the full story, but he makes a point. So basically, a character is telling her that she needs to, I guess, stop the Hades AI that has not a prerogative. It has a mission of basically cleaning the slate so that another AI can take over, Gaia AI, and rebuild, I don't know, the Earth for society and whatever. So he tells Aloy it's imperative that you stop this AI. It's imperative that you stop this cult, this small army, whatever. Otherwise, we're all fucked. And despite that, she still prioritizes something else, like finding out her mother, family, or anything else, which people point like, that's stupid. If you don't survive, you can't explore that. But I can't say that I've known people like her, because, we're not in an apocalypse or post-apocalypse. But I understand that line of thought, because at some point, and especially when you consider how she grew up, how the tribe treated her, and who she valued and who she lost, that's an interesting character trait. Because, yeah, I don't care if the world dies because the world was constantly against me. I want to find out something else. And that narrow-mindedness is something that can cost and almost cost her life. So when it was mentioned that the character was dull, I couldn't fully agree on that. And when the story was stated how it went, well, I don't fully understand the story. I tried to write some notes here in a book here so I can remember them a bit better. But it felt like, how do you say? It felt like people are pointing towards the older games like they were more fun or better made, when they had flaws of their own and they just have different approach. Like if you're playing the old God of War games, they're fun hack and slash not shooters. God damn it, my tongue is twisting. Sorry, Leksha. From this. Okay, before I continue, do you want to say something? Comment on this.
I mean, I'm just kind of taking in what you're saying, to be honest. I think it's a very interesting point what you're making.
Thanks. I try not to talk too much because I also want for you to talk and voice your opinion and perspective, because it can be different. But when people approach it like a game is taking itself too seriously, or a film or anything else is taking itself too seriously, I don't take that as a full critique or as a point of a flaw. Like Spec Ops: The Line is a pretty serious game in that regard, and it's a third-person military shooter where the game is pointing the finger at you and asking you, do you feel accomplished yet? Do you feel like you're a hero in all of this that you're doing? And as a medium that can do that, that's pretty entertaining. Or not entertaining, but also interesting. Or you mentioned Call of Juarez. I played on one game, Gunslinger, and it's a fun.
Gunslinger was really good.
Yeah, but I remember watching along Noah Calder-Gervais, he covered Call of Juarez, and when he was covering Gunslinger, he mentioned and pointed out how Gunslinger managed to tell a Western story the best and only way a game can do, because this guy comes, the bounty hunter Silas Greaves, comes into the bar, and he says, "Yep, and Dwight Eisenhower there asked him, like, are you really that guy? Like, yep, that was me. And they buy him drinks and listen to his stories. As he's telling stories, the story and the level or opponents change. So when he says, suddenly I was attacked by 20 Apaches and now you need to shoot 20 Apaches, or I went into the mine and then got blown up, but luckily that didn't happen because it was a bit smarter. The way how it's approached, it's fun. It's implementing, the storytelling, how a gunslinger would tell you his stories. Like, it's all exaggerated. Oh, yeah, I fought, I wrestled with this guy, barely survived. But also, it is a serious story about, a guy hunting down another guy for vengeance. And the question is, well, do you finish that? Because, you're not getting your brothers back. The guy is changed. What do you gain from it? Or, do you serve justice? Because you killed a lot of people to get here. So when people point at God of War, I think they're doing a disservice to both God of War by saying it's too serious, and also to games like Red Dead Redemption to compare, like the games of, you play probably those games so you better understand them. The story in God of War is also about between Kratos and his son. Something on A. I don't know his name. Atreus. Okay, so the part of the story is also their relationship, best as he can on his own. And, maybe he's not the best candidate for that because, he was a God of War, or maybe he still is, or maybe he's the guy who is really good at doing that. So the question is, well, how does this guy raise a kid? And so when people, point at that by taking it too seriously, I think the game was trying to explore something in that regard and talk about, the burdens of a man trying to raise a kid and how it ain't that easy. It can be inspiring, but I remember, is it true that like in one game he says to his son to shut his feelings down, to keep him to himself, to not show vulnerability, but in the sequel he reverts on that. He does a 180.
Yeah, so the dialogue that you've mentioned is Kratos says it to Atreus at the beginning when he hunts it's like a deer or an elk, like,
Mhm.
and he says, shut your feelings down. You must be strong. You must be stoic, because he was hesitating, firing the bow into the animal.
Oh, whew. And later when he mentions the other, if I can get the context for that, like I think the quote was something lines: "Don't show vulnerability, don't open to their suffering, don't accept them." Something like that. It was.
Yeah, I think that's kind of towards the end of the first game where he gets the chains of Olympus back, and he basically decides, if this is who like I am to be, then I have to be better. And it's kind of because he's let himself show his emotions, because he's let himself grow as a person, he's realized that it's not weakness to try and rise above these feelings, and to not kind of bury these things deep down.
Mm-hmm.
At least as far as I understood it. I could be wrong.
No, I think you're pretty on point because I think Red Dead Redemption 2 also explores that, but in a different shade when you compare it to Arthur. Like, when Arthur gets tuberculosis, spoiler for a 6-year-old game for everyone who's listening here. Sorry, I need to laugh a bit. But when he gets tuberculosis, and when he interacts with certain characters, he's always like, when they ask him if he's okay, even though you can look on his face that he isn't, he shrugs it off a bit, like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm peachy, totally normal and all that. And only when he manages to talk with Sister Calderon does he admit, I'm afraid. Because, he can fight, other cowboys, the army, and everything else. Those are tangible things that you have a binary solution, so to speak, in terms of run away or shoot them, and, it's solved. But, with tuberculosis, it's like, you can delay it a bit. That's it. You will die, and you'll die sooner than most normal people without that disease. And I remember one guy, when he was, analyzing Arthur as a character, he talked about this masculinity that men usually present, as stoic, strong, and all that, not only towards other men, but, people in general. And that, that vulnerability is never shown because, okay, you've shown your vulnerability. How do you handle it from there? How do you grow? Like, it's more acceptable for a woman to be seen to be broken or crying or anything else than it is for a man, I guess, because I guess the idea of a man is to be, like the stalwart bulwark against everything else. So if that breaks, well, what do we do now? The same way how, for example, you get a bit shocked and scared when you see that you press children or women to the front line because things are getting desperate and they shouldn't be there. Like, if things are getting to that point, then maybe then you have some vulnerability in thinking of, do we really need to continue this fight in this way? So, when people are dunking on that and pretensions and anything else, I just see it as approaching it differently, because GTA games were like that before. Like, up till San Andreas, you have a relatively happy ending in all of those games. But
relatively, yeah.
Well, yeah, like, Vice City is basically you end as Scarface and now you're ruling practically the whole city. In San Andreas, it's okay, your former gang members and family betrayed you and you killed them, but now you have an empire with your brother and everything's okay, fancy schmancy and all that. But in GTA 4, which is fun when you compare to GTA 5, in GTA 5 you can have a happy ending, Death Wish. But in GTA 4, it's like, choose one, you lose something. It's not gonna be nice. And the
Yeah.
same happened. And the same happened in Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption 2, each having their own impact that hits you in the gut because Rockstar wanted to say, make a game that's a bit more serious. And I don't see people saying, oh, that's pretentious or that's too serious. Like, no, do it. It's digestible in that way. Plenty of people enjoyed Red Dead Redemption 2 because it's like a Western movie, but you can play it.
I think that's why I don't hate GTA 5. Like I play the game probably every few years and I like it. I enjoy playing it, but it doesn't have anywhere near the impact of like GTA 4 where, as you say, towards the end of that game, I mean GTA 4 is really fucking miserable and really fucking dark the whole time.
Mm,
Like it's 30 hours of misery. It's just no one gets what they want. Nobody gets ahead. People get killed for like basically no reason. And yeah, in the ending, if you take the deal and go back to Dimitri, then Roman ends up being killed. And if you go and take revenge on Dimitri and by extension Ray Bulgarian or
yeah.
whatever the fuck the guy's name. I can't quite remember.
Yeah,
Some
the quasi.
some angry Ukrainian bloke,
I think he's possibly former
Serbian.
Soviet or no, not no, because Ko is Serbian. Like, and for anyone listening here, short introduction to Eastern Europe. Um, Ray Bulgarian is probably either Bulgarian or he's possibly Russian, not necessarily Ukrainian. Nico is probably Serbian, I believe.
Yeah,
Which is funny because like his last name should be Belic instead of Belic, and it's entertaining for me that Rockstar can get a lot of details right, but then pronunciation and writing of the name is like even in Red Dead Redemption 2, Marko Dragic or Dra. I don't know how he says it
well
because
they fuck up in Red Dead Redemption 2 because uh, the guy who voices the guy who acts Arthur Morgan, he's an Irishman and he says Roger Clarkson an Irishman and he says the whole game they're going Colm O'Driscoll. It's not Colm, it's Colm.
yeah, only Sean corrects them, and I
Yeah,
think I think Clark mentioned like, but if Arthur's Irish, he probably knows that, so he should also probably know how to pronounce it. But it's funny that Sean is the only one, the Irish of them Irish all says like, no, it's not Colm, it's Colm.
yeah.
but But even Colm says his name Colm because you come there, you adapt your name. Like I know some Croatians, old Croatians, like 19th century, that when they arrived in the United States, they modified their name so that it's easier to pronounce and that it's a bit more Americanized. Like Marko Dragic. I'm gonna say Dragic because that's possibly how it should be said. Like he didn't Americanize his name when you look at it in the game. It was, but he pronounces like that. Like, please just hire a Serbian or Croatian that can confirm that it's correct.
I just
Like,
realized with GTA 4, I mean, it's originally Dimitri, and then it ends up, regardless of which ending you pick, you have to go after Pegorino and kill Pegorino.
Pegorino. Let me see. No. It's different. Like if you go for the revenge, you kill Dimitri first, and then you go after. Yeah, but if you go for the deal, they're both alive, but Dimitri betrays Pegorino, so you're finishing off Dimitri.
Okay.
I remember that detail. But yeah, it's basically in that game you either lose your cousin or you lose, your love.
It's Kate McCreary, isn't it? It's the Irish
Correct.
family.
Yeah. The only positive light in that whole half because the rest are criminals, and the one who's in the police force is a corrupt police commissioner.
Well,
so.
you have to kill like one of them. You have to make the decision. Of the only one that we know canonically gets out alive is Packy McCreary because he's in GTA 5.
Yeah,
The rest could all be dead for all we know. They probably were.
Well, yeah, like one of them is in one of the other brothers, the one who was, I guess, with the RRN, has a drug addiction, and the police commissioner. One of them is definitely dead. I don't know why, but I always lean more towards killing the police commissioner, Francis.
Every time I kill Francis.
Because he's more, when you look at him objectively. It depends on what's objective for you. But when you look at Francis, like, he's capable. He's in a comfortable and good position of power and all that. He's more stable and maybe a bit more truthful compared to Derek. But when you look at Derek, you see a broken man of who once was. He's telling you the truth, at least the truth that he knows, paranoid as he may be. And you feel pity, and that draws you more to him. Whereas Francis is like, yeah, I'm doing all right like, if he was like, Ross, Agent Ross from Red Dead Redemption 1, and says, yeah, I'm not a saint. I'm doing what I need to. This is dirty, and I'll do that if I need to because that's my job. And the alternative is anarchy. He owns up to it. Ross owns up to it and is like, yeah, I'm dirty as you, maybe even dirtier because of the position that I inhabit and that I need to do as an agent. But I'm okay with it. I'm not going to pretend and moralize about it. Whereas Francis does that, and that pisses me off. It's like, I'm going to kill you on principle alone, even if that's the worst decision here. You don't sell me book. Yeah.
It just ends up being moral grandstanding. And I feel like the biggest problem is there was so much like character and nuance and depth to GTA 4, which I don't think is present in GTA 5. And I think about it, it's like, okay, well, Devin Weston's a caricature. There aren't really like that many legitimate threats in GTA 5. Everyone's kind of brushed off as a funny joke. Like the Aztecas with Trevor, the Chinese, they're brushed off. Devin completely brushed off. Martin Majorazo, he's like initially, the reason for the first heist, but as soon as Trevor kind of threatens him, he backs off. And then at the end,
I mean, he bites off his ear.
Yeah, well, fine, but he still had control of a cartel. He could have sent men. He could have gone after Trevor. But even at the ending, like, okay, kill Michael, kill Trevor, or do the death wish. But when I look at GTA 6, and I just feel like they're gonna go even more in that direction. It's gonna be an even bigger power fantasy. It's gonna be even more over the top. They're not gonna play it straight or give it any depth or give it any character because GTA 5 and GTA Online has just kind of existed on that kind of larger than life energy rather than being like a more kind of grounded, more kind of serious experience, which they pawned off on Red Dead 2 and they did with both Red Dead games and GTA 4, and they kind of haven't done anything other than that for decades now.
I mean, that's an interesting, correct assessment. I didn't think about GTA 6 that much, that it could lean towards that, more towards GTA 5's direction than GTA 4. But when you, divide the games like that, and you see that the Western games, Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, that they're more serious in that, whereas, GTA 5 and onwards, it was more like, yeah, crime sort of pays off. I can see that. I think GTA 5 has some interesting things, how it explores like how crime perpetuates itself in the sense that it's profitable. There's a reason why people would pick it. Like, there's a character in the game, you probably know, you pass by him, you do some missions, he and his wife kill each other, Floyd and Deborah. You look at Floyd and it's like, there are people that live like that in the real world. But we usually look at the trio of characters that we have, and I guess some people like to imagine that they're Trevor, not insane, not a broken man, but more in the sense of that they're the wild card, that they're their own boss, that they can do whatever they want. I think they lean more into that, I guess, power fantasy of sorts for GTA 5. I like how it's, I guess, critiquing, capitalism, even if it's another I mentioned. It's a bit light. I think Red Dead Redemption 2 did a better critique at civilization and humans as a whole, with the wilderness and living in cities, that, and how it has nuance and it's a bit more complicated than what GTA 5 did. But, GTA 5 got them the big bucks. Online is profitable. so they'll probably go for that to get even more money. And maybe if they want, that's their goal, they make a Red Dead Redemption 3 or a new IP that explores, other subjects a bit more seriously in that regard.
Makes a lot of sense. Well,
I mean, continue. I had a thought, but I don't know how to.
it's okay. You can say it.
But that's the thing. I had a thought and escaped, and I need to structure it back. So please continue.
I was just gonna say it kind of seems like we've hit a kind of good kind of stopping point.
All right. Did we? I don't know.
I reckon so.
I remember I was writing on a piece of paper what other subjects could be covered. Here, in that regard, I'm not sure which ones I would pick if I can find that paper again, but because I remember some of your guests that were here, I didn't watch all of the podcasts. I watched like 2 of them, and I know that I watched Larry's. I wrote on a piece of paper what we could discuss. Red Dead Redemption 2 was one of them. We talked about Zero Dawn. We talked about God of War. What else? Well, you probably mentioned it in previous podcasts, so I might be asking the redundant question, but you mentioned like that since you're working in this industry, of hardware and video games, that you have a bit more insight and a different approach and relationship with all of that, to the point that maybe some people think that you're privileged, that you're being paid off or something like that.
I'm definitely not being paid off, but I am definitely privileged. Whether people believe me or not, it's up to them, but it doesn't matter how many free game codes I get or how much free hardware I get given. People are always going to get a straight answer. They're always going to get the truth, whether they like it or not. I don't work for companies. I don't do free PR. I'm not an influencer. If a game fucking sucks, if a component for hardware isn't up to snuff, if it costs too much money, I'm calling that shit out. And I'm going to keep doing that for as long as I can until the well is dry. Who knows?
Yeah. It reminds me of a friend that's also a journalist, but not in video games. More like journalist.
A real one.
Haha. There's no such thing like real journal. Like, when they joke like there's doctors and then there's veterinarians. It's like, yeah, well, at least when you're a veterinarian, you take care of animals. People are generally more grateful for that than they are when you try to take care of humans, because patient, got complications or died and everything, and suddenly they're bickering against you and considering a lawsuit.
Yeah.
At least, I don't even read newspapers that much, which is a detriment to myself. But there was that problem when she was working basically for news, and there was like a lot of mobbing and a lot of nasty shit going there that she reported that was aimed at her, but also at other colleagues, to the point that she said, "That's it. I'm not gonna do journalism anymore. It was what I wanted, but I noticed that I'm slamming my head against the wall, and my head will break sooner than the wall." Later, she returned. Luckily, she found inspiration and good friends and all that. But we can talk about that. Like, people are, having less trust in the mainstream media and, video game journalists in general, which I can sort of understand. Like, when IGN gives high praise for a Call of Duty game, but it gives a 4.5 for Terminator Resistance, which is not only a good shooter game, but also a well-made Terminator game, all things considered, considering how, video games based on movies or other IPs tend to suck a bit in that regard. So, but I think that people then swing to the opposite. Yeah, you better reviews than that, and I would say YouTubers can make more consistent reviews to the point that where they're coming from, but not necessarily better reviews because maybe they lack a certain skill or knowledge, or maybe they're pushing an agenda of their own, which then people come to watch them for pushing that agenda more than they are pushing for a proper review. Like, at least in other entertainment media, when some people say that a certain show is woke or too left or whatever, and then you watch the show, it's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I can give you the real answer. And the truth
Sure.
of the matter is, reviews don't really matter. To be completely honest, like everyone has a set of biases. Everyone has preconceived notions of the kind of games that they enjoy, the things they're good at, franchises they like.
Hmm.
And when you go to someone like, okay, I reviewed Mortal Kombat 1 a couple of years ago. I'm a big
Hmm.
Mortal Kombat fan. So by extension, because I've grown up playing the games for 20 years, well, longer now,
Hmm.
that I'm basically going to be biased because I like the characters and I like the series. My review will probably be a bit more favorable than someone who's coming in who doesn't give a shit about MK, who has to play it from scratch. And it's the
Hmm.
same with like, okay, I reviewed Dead Space, but
Uh-huh.
I love the Dead Space games. My review was very positive because I've played all three Dead Space games, hundreds of hours over the years.
Hmm.
When you get someone who's an expert on the subject, you can be impartial, fine. But most of the time, unless it's like a brand new IP from a developer no one's heard of, there's always going to be sway. There's always going to be biases, and it's not a conscious decision most of the time. The majority of the time, it's you have prior experience. You're the right person for the job. Be as fair and as balanced as you can. But there's no such thing as an objective review. That's a paradox. It's a misnomer. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Reviews are subjective. Like if I was reviewing motorbikes, for example,
Yes.
and they said, okay, you drive a CBR 500R. Here's a Fireblade. Here's a Suzuki Hayabusa. Here's a Blackbird. If it's a kind of sport bike that I'm already familiar with, chances
Hmm.
are I'm going to have a good opinion and that'll influence my opinion to an extent because I already kind of know the ballpark that I'm in. The same with like reviewing hardware. I have a 4090 in my PC.
Hmm.
It's a great GPU. But, I've grown up building PCs and really entrenched in the hardware. I know what a good component looks like, but I'm gonna be biased if I've only ever bought Nvidia GPUs. I mean, I haven't, but if I had, and
Hmm.
then they go, okay, here's the best one money can buy. I mean, it is objectively until the new one comes out in January.
Yeah. uh,
Allegedly, allegedly.
but even now you reminded me, Video Game Donkey made a video about video game critics, and what he made a point of, have a consistent voice and make it clear what you like or dislike. So, for example, Symmetry, he doesn't like turn-based RPGs. JRPGs or something game related, even less. And if it's long, if it's dialogue filled like a visual novel, it's like, now you're killing me. But if he points, I don't know, at Persona 5 and he says that's a 3 out of 5 game, then you realize, that could be a good game coming from his mouth. Like, even those, how do you say, biases, if you're aware of them and, you approach and, make a disclaimer, I guess, in that regard, reviews, well, how do I form this? Like a review or analysis of something can be understood even if some things are not factually correct. I was about to mention something about this. So factual correct reviews. There were some discussions on the previous podcast that video game journalists should be at least capable at playing and finishing a game. And you mentioned Cuphead and the guy who couldn't even pass the tutorial level, at least initially. Later, he did, from what I've heard.
Yeah. So that more so goes back to basic competency, which I mean, look, I'm not at liberty to talk shit about people, not
Okay,
being.
if we can't talk much about it or per
Well,
detail, I won't push.
I'll give the outline of the fact that a lot of people that get into games media are not very good at playing video games. They don't have very good media literacy skills, and their quality of writing normally isn't very good. That's
Mhm.
about all I can say.
That's media literacy. That's a word that people mention. What's media literacy for, important for that? I mean, I want to learn a bit more, and so they have a different perspective, expand it, and all.
Namely, it comes down to critical thought and being constructive and understanding that there are certain tropes and certain, I guess, tick boxes that's come up when it comes to a certain genre. There are conventions within a particular video game genre, how cutscenes are phrased, how basic 3 or 5 act storytelling is told, how non-linear versus sequential uh, play conditioning, like however you really want to phrase it. And a lot of people, and I find that this is quite sad, but we have seen if early reviews come out and it's like 9s and 10s across the board, even
Hmm.
from 2 or 3 outlets, most of the time,
Hmm.
if a rough idea has been put into the public consensus, if people have you know an indication of the direction that things are, most outlets, most people will then regurgitate the same opinion, whether they read the article or not. Sometimes fine, it can be okay. Embargo lifts.
Hmm.
50 reviews come out at the same time, and people are roughly saying the same thing. That happens a lot. But most of the time, it can be okay. The earliest reviews are going up, and then it's just the parroting and the parroting and the parroting. And then people, reviewers, like content creators, whatever,
Hmm.
very few people now will go against the grain and say how they really feel. And the thing is, games journalism is tricky. I mean, I work in games journalism, but it's hard to say if it has the value it had like 15, 20 years ago, where nowadays most people will go to their favorite content creator, they'll go on TikTok, they'll go on YouTube, they'll listen or they'll watch a video being played, that they'll be told by whether they want to admit it or not, they will be influenced. They will go, okay, my favorite million subscriber channel is playing a game, he said I will like it. They'll buy it based on that recommendation. They don't really need a critical analysis, they don't need a deep dive, they don't need to have their biases kind of challenged. They can be in their safe space. Most people will subscribe to one type of content creator. Oh,
Hmm.
they do FPS games, and most of the time, you know, they know what they're getting regardless.
Yeah,
And
because that guy covers FPS games, for example.
yeah, so new FPS game comes out. Oh, they like it. It's good. Or within the first 30 seconds, hey, this game's not great. Don't buy it. That's the end of that. They don't need to go any deeper than the surface level, and that's kind of the end of it. Really, is that like critical thought and analysis, and like using like no one cross references things anymore. It used to be 5, 10 years ago. You would see like game trailers or an announcement, or you'd read in a magazine, and
Hmm.
before you put any fucking money down, you either flicked through multiple magazines or you read multiple websites, and you kind of discovered, okay, I'm gonna listen to what 10 people are saying and
Hmm.
then decide if it's right. But now it's people don't have the attention span for that. They don't have the endurance to kind of go, okay, well, let's see what one guy on TikTok or one girl on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, maybe not Facebook, but Instagram
Yeah.
Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, a minute.
Hmm.
Review me a game in 60 seconds. Hey, be like, hey guys, I just got the latest Red Dead Redemption 2 from Rockstar, and I've been playing it the last couple of weeks. I've had a bit of a access journalism, and I really like it. And here are 5 reasons why I think you should buy the game when it comes out November 15th, 2018. I don't know, but
No,
it's
but you're right because you're and he uses a clip of I think a musician or a rapper, and he says like back in the day you need to take time to listen to an album and write a review, and today the album comes out and the review is like in a day. You can't review a whole album in a day. Like you can make a first impression, but that's not full consideration for what you took as a piece of media to review or make an analysis on.
Yeah, and to be honest, the whole system needs to change. Like everything needs to be overhauled. But we've seen since the pandemic, people don't have the attention span for long format. I know there are exceptions. I know there are certain channels doing really long form to great success. I know that, but that's the exception, not the rule.
Well,
And
yeah.
that's where we're at now. It's pretty depressing, but
Well, I think what you stated, like back in, I guess, a bit slower, people had the endurance for the attention, and I would say the willpower to do it, the decision to do it. That's also important because if you don't want to read a book or a magazine or watch a really long review on something, you don't want to do that, you won't. And the fact that we are in this, I would say, is indicative not only how the whole world or the system or this entity of groups that has been made, it's not only that system was made like, it's also because people shifted towards it. Like, why is everything slop? Because people watch slop. Like 5-minute videos or 10-minute videos about a drama, about a review that isn't a full review. It's a complaint about a minor issue. It's that, and people go towards that. It's basically what they want, and also because that gets the easy clicks, the easy views. Because saying this game is bad or this game is good is simple to the point. People understand it. That's why they click. But saying that a game is weird, a game is this or that, that isn't clear. So you draw in even less people to get the views, to get the recognition of what you're doing. Like, for example, Dark Souls 2. I know I mentioned before. The point is, when you look at the Dark Souls 2 gets a lot of flack for some things that Dark Souls 1 and 2 also has a problem.
yeah.
Despite giving a lot of like Dark Souls 2. Okay, H-Bomber guy made a video on Dark Souls 2, and then Baller made a 10-hour fucking response on that. Jesus Christ. Sorry. So what he mentioned was like when Demon Souls came out back in those days, 2009. The people who were praising Demon Souls and nominating were the games journalists. It's a clunky, it's a hard game. You should try it. And then when Dark Souls 1 arrived in Dark Souls 2 and 3, people realized, yeah, the guy who the sword and it takes 2 seconds to hit something, that's not a bug or incompetent design. That's a feature, because you need to think about positioning, hitting, and all that, where the enemy is. And when people, how the Dark Souls community is seen as this skill issue, get good from the outside at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're yapping all about that. These veterans, wannabe cool bros, whatever you want to call them. And then they shit on Dark Souls 2, which I consider provides you with the most things that you can do. Like, you burn a bonfire aesthetic so you can reset the area, move game plus, and fight the boss. That's cool. The other Souls games don't necessarily have that. And it's like, where is this? Why isn't this in Dark Souls 3 or in Elden Ring? It has challenging enemies where you can't just like run past them and then go to the fog gate and boss rush everything. It's like, no, there's 50 infantrymen here, and you need to find a way on how to bypass them without just sprinting by them like you're running down the hallway in the school. You need to think, and it's like, yeah, it has jank. Some things don't work. The adaptability trait is tricky, but like, this is the most challenging and fulfilling game that you get, especially with the DLCs, which are extra challenging. Like, you're all about Dark Souls being tough and not for noobs, so why the fuck are you complaining about this? Like, there's one segment where you go to the first of those giants, you climb up some ladders, and there's a bunch of infantrymen laying around. They look dead, but they're just resting, I guess. If you run around them, and you aggro them, and you try to go to the next ladders up, a hollow infantryman will start descending upon it, blocking your path. So now you have like, I don't know, 6 guys down there ready to kill you, plus a guy on top blocking you. So the lesson was, don't aggro, eliminate them one by one, think what could happen down the road. But people say, oh, that's poor design, despite Demon Souls having something similar, Dark Souls 1 having something similar, Dark Souls 3 having something similar. And this lack of critical thought is applicable to other things like this, when you mentioned it. It's like, if people say like, oh, Dark Souls 2 is bad, which I believed at the start, it infuriated me. But I realized later you just need to adapt to it, haha. And it's like, yeah, critical thinking isn't present because where can you learn critical thinking? Like, you can learn it in school or university, though that's not a guarantee. You can learn it from other people. Again, not a guarantee, like, watching YouTubers or talking with people. You could learn it on yourself. You read something, you observe it, you think from a different perspective. And that's also not a guarantee. Like, you and me, you more than me, because you write articles, you examine hardware products and video games from a more different, deeper aspect than me. Like, I read your article about Red Dead Redemption 2 and Arthur's tuberculosis and how it relates personally to you. I found that a well-written and personal article that showed me how much Arthur Morgan matters as a character that's really well developed, because I never imagined that I would play Red Dead Redemption 2. I'd never thought that I would have a PC that's strong enough and that I would enjoy. It's like, yeah, Rockstar Games, sandbox, well written, blah, blah, blah. That was my thought about Red Dead Redemption 2, because I was hearing praises left and right. Like, yeah, sure, it's a good game. Whoop-de-freaking-do. That was my approach back then, believe it or not.
Have you got any kind of final words of wisdom for the people listening at home? Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to recommend?
Well, I have a channel, though I'm not sure if pointing towards it would be good. I haven't uploaded anything there in 10 years. I have an account on which I continued the story after 8 years of hibernation, but it's questionable how that is well written. So far, nothing to plug. I don't think so. But in terms of a message, considering what we discussed and how cynical it seems to be, or at least, when I'm speaking and pointing at things, that I would say to the people listening here, in general, what you're doing as a work, or, job or life, or you're writing something, or you're picturing something, playing, whatever, keep going. Like, that's a victory in and of itself. Like, every day that you do your job and enjoy the stuff that you can enjoy with friends or something else, something that fulfills you, keep going. This comes from a guy who, if I was in World War I would be like, yeah, let me charge over the trenches so I can fucking end it right here. I would still probably say, okay, if we need to do that, let's do it smartly. Let's do it to increase our chances of seeing the next day. That's my ending message, if it's good enough.
Works for me. Well, I want to thank everyone who's listened to, I think this is episode 6, so there's something like 12, 13 hours in total. I think that's enough for a season 1, a season wrap. And you never know, maybe next year we'll do this again. Maybe this was a fun little experiment. Who knows? Until then, well,